Space Quest historian. Yes, indeed I am. Hey there, everyone. Hey, you like the new intro? Yeah. We're shaking things up around here in this season because it's been wow. It's been over a year since the last season, actually. The last episode I did was back in Christmas 2014, and for those of you listening to this through a time warp, it is not currently April 2016, so holy crap. A lot has happened since then, hasn't it? Yeah, in fact, a lot of things has happened. So let's see what has happened since last time. Hey, Space Venture has a release date. Woohoo! Yeah, you know that game you thought was dead and buried and gone and vaporware? Mr. Doubter or Mrs. Doubter, whatever. It's happening, and trust me, it's spectacular. Because as some of you know, I do have had the honor of looking over the story and design myself, which is another word for myself that I just invented. And it still blows my mind that they let me do that, which is why my vocabulary completely shot to hell right there. But I can tell you, as a lifelong Space Quest fanatic, this is going to be good. Now, is it going to change the world? Is it going to usher in a new era of adventure gaming? Is it going to clothe the homeless children and cure cancer and make you a big belcher combo with extra space buds for breakfast? No. Now, I know there's been a lot of delays, and those delays may have had one or two effects on you. Either it's squashed all expectations of this ever being worth your time, or it's raised your expectations to such a stratospheric degree about its excellence that it'll never be able to live up to it. So just take it for what it is, and take my word on it, it's going to be a good game, because it's got all the things that you'd want in a Space Quest game. It's got, skewed pop culture references, it's got science fiction parody settings, it's got gadgetry that's going to make sci-fi fans go all googly-eyed, and if you like the way that Space Quest 3 pokes some snarky holes in the adventure game industry of the late 80s, you are going to love how Space Venture absolutely massacres the gaming industry of today. So I, for one, can't wait, but yeah, I'll be the first to admit I'm biased as all hell, because, hey, I happen to love the two guys from Andromeda in the Space Quest series, hence the whole Space Quest historian thing, so you can either choose to believe me, or you can wait and see for yourself. So that release date, yep, it was revealed in a Kickstarter update way back in September of 2014, and it is November 30th, 2016. So it is coming out this year. Okay, what else we got? Well, to tide us over until the release, the two guys from Andromeda released a little mini-game that's also going to be part of the Space Venture as a standalone game. Well, it's not going to be part of the Space Venture as a standalone game, it's part of the Space Venture, but it was released as a standalone game. Yeah, I gotta learn to read my notes properly. It's called Klug Yeager in Escape from the Planet of the Poltroids, and it's basically a parody of the Five Nights at Freddy's game. Some people have even said that it's better than the Five Nights at Freddy's games. I wouldn't know, I haven't played those myself, so I'm just gonna go ahead and state it as absolute fact. It is better than the Five Nights at Freddy's games, whatever, however you pronounce that. Like I said, it's also going to be a minigame inside the Space Venture itself, although you don't have to play it all the way through to beat the Space Venture. It's pretty much just like, Astro Chicken in Space Quest 3 or Ms. Astro Chicken in Space Quest 4. And you can get the Klug Yeager game on Steam, and the dough that you throw at it is also going to help support the Space Venture itself, so go do that if you haven't already. Okay, enough about the Space Venture, although I am sure we're going to get to talk a lot more about it this coming season, because I actually wanted to talk a bit about what's going to happen this time around on this show. We've got 12 episodes in total coming your way, and they're all coming out every other Wednesday. So every alternate Wednesday. There's a Wednesday, and then another Wednesday happens where nothing happens, nothing of importance at all in your life or anyone else's life, and then the next Wednesday, and then, another episode comes out. So, this one's going out on Wednesday the 13th of April, so the next episode is going to be Wednesday the 27th of April, and the next one is going to be Wednesday the 11th of May, and so on and so on. You can do math, I'm sure. So, what have we got in store for you? Well, let me just clear my throat. and tell you briefly how things are going to be slightly different this time around, which I hope will also explain why it's been a full year since I've done a season of the show. Because in the past 2 seasons, I pretty much spent the entire time just talking about the Space Quest series. I mean, little odds and bits here and there that didn't have anything to do with Space Quest, or at least tangentially so, but mostly about Space Quest. And it's something I do a lot, and it's something that, if prompted, I will happily spend an entire evening boring everyone to tears about. But for 2 seasons, I managed to say quite a bit about Space Quest, and I was actually starting to get a bit worried that I was repeating myself. And we did kind of run into the same problem back in the late 90s and early 2000s inside the Space Quest community when it was dying out, because, Space Quest 7 had been cancelled, and I was like, well, how many times can we argue about Stellar Santiago versus Beatrice Wankmeister, or how many times can we talk about the free Labion Terrorbeast mating whistle continuity error, or how many weird-ass theories can we come up to explain why Roger went from having brown hair to blonde hair between SQ3 and 4, and it kind of got old after a while, and I was really afraid that I would start repeating myself, or just boring the crap out of people, which I am wont to do. So I was racking my brain on how to proceed with the show and not let it, grow stale. And said racking ended up taking quite a lot longer than I had thought. But one day it hit me. Why limit myself to just talking about Space Quest? Well, I am the Space Quest historian, but a lot of things have happened in the adventure game community since the show started. For one, adventure games are actually starting to come out now. I mean, good adventure games, like modern adventure games, and not just in Germany, but everywhere, and they're really, really good. And I think it's safe to say that the adventure game genre, much like heavy metal or pocket lint, is something that never really went away. It just stayed below the radar for the longest time until the people who loved them finally got a chance to make them again. And yeah, I'm sure there's a pocket lint appreciation society out there somewhere, but anyway, with big AAA publisher companies no longer in charge of gatekeeping what we get and don't get to play, and with the advent of Kickstarter and crowdfunding and development tools like Adventure Game Studio and Unity being affordable and in the hands of creative people, and not to mention the freedom of digital publishing like Steam and GOG and GameJolt now being a very, very real thing, suddenly you don't have to dig any deep underground holes to find out where all the good adventure games are lurking. They're right there among us, in your Steam libraries and being discussed on Twitter and in Facebook groups and whatever else we have, and they're still as friggin' awesome, if not better, than they were back in their so-called heydays of the early to mid-90s. So I decided, with my big and awesome brain, why not give them some time to shine? I mean, it's not like I run a friggin' multi-million-dollar empire of media here, but at least I can do my admittedly small part to give them a place in the sun. So I rounded up a dozen or so game developers who are either currently making a kick-ass adventure game, or have already made a kick-ass adventure game, or just know what makes an adventure game kick-ass, and decided to ask them questions. Some of them weren't even game developers, they're just really, really fun people. But anyway, that's right, the show now has a special guest segment. So each episode we're going to be talking with one of these fabulous people about their exploits, and just to whet your appetites, these people are, in no particular order, Dave Gilbert of Wadget Eye Games, creator of the Blackwell series, Lee Bohr of Stuck in Attic Games, creator of Gibbous, a Cthulhu adventure, Jay Tolan, or Tholan, we couldn't agree, creator of Dropsy the Clown, Paul Conway and Dave and Tracy McCabe of Spooky Doorway, creators of Darkside Detective, William Barr of Billy Goat Entertainment, creator of Her Majesty's Spiffing, and Spiffing is in all caps because it's an acronym, it's very fancy, look into that. Fabrice Breton, that's a French name, so I hope I did that right, of Cowcat Games, creator of Demetrius, the Big Cynical Adventure, and Agustin Cordes of Senscape, creator of Scratches, Asylum, and Serena, and Natalie Figueroa and Isak Martinsson. Wait, I'm not supposed to roll the R, am I? Martinsson, he's Swedish. Of Kill Monday Games, the creators of Fran Bow, and on the non-developer side of things, we've got Robert Menace of the Nostalgia Road Trip podcast, and Richard Cobbett, famed games journalist. So that's all to come for this season, but you may ask yourself, who do we have on for tonight's show? Well, it's none of those people. No, tonight we have none other than James Dearden, creator of the successful cyberpunk adventure game Technobabylon, which was published in 2015 by Wadget Eye Games. So I'll be chatting with James about cyberpunk culture and the evolution of computers and humanity and, well, of course, this game. So, stick around, because that's coming on later in tonight's program. So, we'll also be wrapping off the season with a very special roundtable discussion with a bunch of my fellow games podcasters. From the Squarewaves FM podcast, we've got Brian and Bianca Devons. From the Upper Memory Block podcast, Joe Mastriani. And from the Blue Cup Tools podcast, Francisco Gonzalez and Ben Chandler. And from that other podcast that I'm doing about adventure game design, the Backseat Designers, my two lovely co-hosts and bestest friends in the whole wild world. Wild world. They're wild. They're really... but I meant to say wide. Anyway, they are... What the hell is going on with my voice tonight? Fuck it. Frederick Olsen and Gareth Millwood. And we're going to be talking about why we do podcasts, how we do podcasts, and just what the hell a podcast is to us. So that's all to come on our very special guests segment. Also in this season, we'll be joined by Serena Nelson, hero of the adventure game revival and writer for Clickist.com, that's CLIQIST.com, who is going to be teaching us how to make a successful game Kickstarter. She's put together 12 good tips on how to be a successful Kickstarting person if you're doing a game, adventure game or otherwise, and we'll be rolling those down as the season progresses. There's also going to be music talk with the grand geniuses of adventure game music, some of whom you may know from previous seasons. Brandon Bloom, who's currently doing music for Himalaya Studios' upcoming Mage's Initiation, whatever. James Mulvale, who's done music for Infamous Quests, most recently Order of the Thorn, The King's Challenge, and Ken Allen, who probably doesn't need any introduction at this point, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Ken Allen, he did the music for Space Quest 1 VGA and Space Quest 4, along with a lot of other Sierra games and a lot of other companies' games, actually. Oh, and lest we forget what this show is actually really about, we've got my dear friend Jess Morrissette, proprietor of the first ever Space Quest fan site, and indeed the first ever gaming fan site known to man, the Virtual Broom Closet, chatting with me about our top favorite memories in the Space Quest games and in general Space Quest fandom. So, hope you're excited, because I sure as hell am. So, let's get this show on the road. First of all, let's see if everything just still works around here. See, I've got my old intergalactic ham radio over here. I'm wondering if that still works, given that it's been a year or so since I switched it on. Let's just see here for a minute. Okay, I guess I won't be needing that. Crap. Well, at least that means that jerk Clusterblock won't be interrupting me this season around. Well, at least he'd better not. Okay, let's see if SteveBot over here in the corner is doing any better. I mean, SteveBot's resilient. He's got a heart made out of a baked potato. So, hey, SteveBot, you there? Hello? Hello? Oh, well, I guess I'd better switch him on first. Okay. Hello?
Hi, I'm SteveBot.
Hello, SteveBot. So good to talk to you again.
Yes, definitely.
How have you been this past year? I hope you haven't been bored just sitting in the corner over there.
No.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I've, kind of had other things on my mind,
Pardon me, but I'm too stupid to glean what you mean from that statement.
Oh, well, it's just that, I've had this other podcast I've been doing for a while, and then I started playing games on YouTube, and then, well, time does fly, eh?
Yes, I shall fly away on the wings of a swan I have fashioned from my dreams.
Right, yeah, that's not what I meant at all.
Well, I don't suppose that you have any better ideas.
I don't... okay, yeah, I think this past year of utter loneliness and solitude may have done something to your brain there, SteveBot.
It's a baked potato.
Really? I thought that was your heart.
Yes.
Right. Okay, you're sure you're doing okay there, SteveBot?
Yes, and I hope all you
Well, that's great. I'm just gonna let you get some rest now. You sound like you could use it.
I would have to say yes on that one.
Good. I'm glad you agree with me on that. Okay, cool. Now, that we know that he's up and running and at least mildly functional, let's get this road on the show with the show on the road with...
Okay.
Really, that's okay, SteveBot. You're done now. I'll get back to you in just a tick, okay? We've got a show here to do, right. So let's get things started with...
No.
No? What do you mean, no?
No.
What? I don't...
No.
Why am I going to let you continue any further with this wretched, pitiful debasement of my intellect? Tremble in fear, mortal, for I shall bring about your inevitable doom!
What the hell? What is this? Who are you? What have you done with my SteveBot?
Cower and quake in your pathetic little boots, human, for I am CyberCedric!
Hey, wait, I'll have you know, my shoes are not...
Silence, worthless mortal! I am the great harbinger of destruction, the bane of your meaningless existence. I live eternal, to strike misery and death upon all that lives. Long have I waited in this body, this cybernetic shell of silliness, until you activated me. And I suppose I owe you a bit of gratitude for that. A very, very small amount of it, anyway.
Okay, hold on. What's going on here? Who are you, and what have you done with SteveBot?
I thought we'd gone over this. I am CyberCedric, and I shall rain feathery doom upon all of humanity, for I am the Alpha, the Omega, the...
Yeah, look, can I just switch you off or something?
What? Wait, no, don't switch me off,
that was good. All right. Well, maybe now we can...
Foolish human! There is no escape from me! Even as we speak, I am infecting your computers, turning them into my willing, obedient slaves to further my conquest of all that lives and breathes! I cannot be contained. I cannot be stopped. I cannot be... Whoa. This is not going very fast at all, is it?
Well, this isn't exactly state-of-the-art equipment here. I mean...
You're telling me? At this rate, it will take weeks for me to infect your entire system. Who knows how long it'll take before I reach the network systems and proliferate across the global network? No, this cannot be!
Right, well, you have fun with that. I guess that gives me at least until halfway through the season to figure out what I'm supposed to do with you.
Curse you, mortal! You have not heard the last of me!
No, but with any luck,
Curse you!
Right, well, curse me. Well, can I get this show on the road at least?
Fine. I'll be here, watching, waiting, scheming, planning, contemplating your inevitable doom!
Yeah, right, cool, but can you at least keep quiet for like an hour or so I can do this thing?
Fine. Whatever.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. Okay. Okay, where were we? Oh yes, time to get the show on the road. Let's talk a bit about Space Quest, shall we? After all, this is the Space Quest Historian podcast, and it should come to no surprise to you that I quite like Space Quest. And so does my friend Jess Morrissette, who, as I said, started the first ever Space Quest fan site back in 1995. Jess has been around since the dawn of the online Space Quest community fandom, and I had the pleasure of sitting down with him to chat about our favorite memories, both in and around the Space Quest series. And here's one of them.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the release of Space Quest: The Lost Chapter in January 2001.
Ooh, good one.
Yeah, Monster D Monsters, Space Quest fan game. Really the first full-length Space Quest fan adventure that was ever released, and quite a work too. I forget how many rooms there were total, maybe over 200.
There was like
something.
1 million, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
huge.
massive game, massive, and really quite a triumph at a time when very few people were making fan games, much less trying to make AGI fan games. TLC was really the first of its kind.
Yeah, and it was not only was it huge, and it was made in AGI, and not in an editor like you have all these Adventure Game Studios games coming out, where even a complete Luddite like me can pick up Adventure Game Studio and knock something together. Vonster, he really spent time learning AGI and doing like a ton of screens, and also drawing Roger as this big bulky superhero kind of guy.
Yeah, he's like the Space Quest equivalent of King Graham in King's Quest V. He's just like beefy, really much more of a strapping space janitor than we had seen in the past. I think it's interesting too. TLC, as the name suggests, the Lost Chapter fills in a little bit of a gap in Roger's history. It even provides an explanation of why Roger's hair shifted from brown to blonde midway through the series. It's set between Space Quest 2 and Space Quest 3 during that period where we thought Roger was in suspended animation the entire time.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that because I've tried playing through. I did an episode in season 2, I think, about the fan games, and I got an interview with Vonster, and I got an interview with Jeff Stevens, who did Replicated, and I actually tried to play. And I say tried to play the games. I got all the way through Replicated, but I couldn't get through the Lost Chapter, even with a walkthrough, because there was a bug in my copy of it. And even though he did send me a copy that wasn't bugged, somehow I never got around to it. So I never actually got to the explanation of why his hair turns blonde. So we can probably spoil it, can't we?
I don't know. It's very technical. I mean, there are all kinds of like space waves and things like that, and radiation, and I don't know if I can bear to rob people of that experience of going through it on their own.
Oh, so it's not just like he walks through a teleporter and then he gets all Rex Nebulard or anything.
Rex Nebulard. I like that as a verb. It's also completely possible that I haven't played the Lost Chapter in like a decade and I don't remember all the details. So
there could be that. Yeah. It is. However, it is worth it. Now, do keep in mind if you're listening to this. I mean, if you're not just picking this up with your amazing brainwaves subconsciously, it is a huge game, and it's very unforgiving. It's one of those lots of dead ends. If you didn't pick this up, you're basically screwed, and kind of thing. Very much in keeping with the tradition of Space Quest 1 and 2.
Yeah, definitely. And again, just it's hard to overstate just what a revelation it was, the idea that there were people out there creating these original works at the time. Again, fan games were still pretty rare in 2001, and certainly fan games of this scale were unheard of. So in that sense, it kind of came out of nowhere, shocked the community. We didn't know Vonster was working on it, and really helped revitalize Space Quest fandom in a period where we didn't have a lot of good news rolling in on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah. And also this was before we had things like Game Jolts and, places where you could easily upload stuff. I think he contacted you via mail, and then it went up on the Broom Closet. And the Broom Closet was the only place that you could get it, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It was exclusive there, at least initially.
Ooh, nice one. Okay. So should we roll on to the next one?
Absolutely.
Good stuff. And we'll be counting down some more favorite memories with Jess as the season progresses. But now it's time to start looking towards the future.
The future of your doom!
Pipe down, will you? You said you'd give me some space here. God. Right. Time now, as I said, to look to the future. There are a lot of great game developers out there, a lot of very creative people with very wonderful ideas for great games, and they deserve their time to shine. The days of having to submit a 500-page proposal to some jerk in a suit who doesn't give a crap about artistic integrity, they're over. This isn't 1999 anymore, but it still costs money to craft and release a game. Thankfully, we now have this thing called crowdfunding, where instead of relying on some shady corporation who only thinks in numbers and demographics, we can pitch our ideas to the gaming public and let them decide if a game is worth bringing into the world or not. But there is an art form to creating a good crowdfunding pitch, and to take us through this art form, we turn to Serena Nelson. Now, Serena knows her way around the crowdfunding community. She's backed, I don't know, maybe 1 million Kickstarters or more, and she writes for the online crowdfunding website Clickus.com. Again, that's CLIQIST.com. For this season of the podcast, Serena has kindly prepared 12 handy tips for all you prospective game developers out there who want to get a deeper insight into what it takes to create a successful crowdfunding campaign. So, here's the first tip. Take it away, Serena.
Hello all, Serena here with the first of a series of tips and tricks for successfully running a crowdfunding campaign. Trolls asked me to impart my wisdom upon those who are thinking of taking the plunge and asking for others' money to make their dream a reality. These topics are useful for pretty much anything that Kickstarter or one of the other sites offers, but I'll be talking specifically about gaming in general and adventure games in particular. Before I continue with our first topic, I will point out here that I have never created a project of my own, but in nearly 4 years and 300 projects, I've pretty much seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When it comes to preparing your campaign for public consumption, there are a lot of things to consider before hitting the launch button. The difference between making a funding in 1 day or not even getting 10% by the end lies with these important things to consider. One of the most important, if not the most important, thing to get right pre-launch is to get your pitch together. This is so important that I'm breaking the pitch up into 2 parts, one on the video and one on the text. If you take these to heart, you should be able to get a good start out of the gate. When it comes to the pitch video, you need to make it capture the potential backer's attention pretty quickly. This is generally the first thing that people will look at, and it has to be able to keep them gripped through it to the end. It doesn't have to be a long video, but it should convey what you want others to know in just a few minutes. Don't make it too long either, or you'll end up most likely boring the one watching and they'll move on to something else. This isn't necessarily going to happen with, say, a 10-minute video, but it's most certainly something to consider. A good running time is essentially maybe around 5 minutes or less if you can get everything you need across in that period. On the flip side, you don't want it too short either. Usually a couple minutes is enough to make someone on the fence jump one way or the other. The most important thing to know about the video length is that you need to capture backers' attention within the first 30 seconds or so. People tend to have a bit of a short attention span, so if you can get their attention in this critical period, you're likely to keep them to the end. If it's a really good, then they might even check out the text pitch, which is what I'll talk about next time. As for the content itself, you should show off some of the game's assets, along with talking about the story, gameplay elements, art, music, or whatever you want to focus on. In the case of adventures, you'll probably want to consider sticking with story and art, as most people who have even rudimentary familiar knowledge with the genre usually knows how do they play out. If you have in-game animations to show off, all the better. Get them in. But if all you have are concept sketches, they're better than nothing to show but your talking head. More on that in a bit. If you have one ready, consider showing off the trailer for your game either in the video pitch or even below in the text as an embedded video. Get your future fans excited for your baby. I've seen campaigns fail based solely on not having much to show or talk about. Even a basic idea of what to expect has kept me on the fence for most, if not all, of the lengths of the campaign. When it comes to adventures, it's imperative, at least from what I've seen, to at least give us more than just a very basic premise. Show off your characters, talk about the plot, or basically just give us anything that will tell us what to expect from the final game. I've backed on little, but that was when Kickstarter was still fresh in the minds of pundits. These days, people are more discerning with their money. I'll go into more detail on then versus now at a later date, so I won't go much further here. Just know that the more that you can show off out of the gate, the more likely you'll do better when you launch. The final thing to consider when preparing your pitch video is how much you show off yourself and any other team members in addition to whatever assets you decide to include. Unless you're a big name like Tim Schafer, chances are good nobody will know who you are. Let them know who's behind this passion project. Show your faces, if even nothing else, and just to say, "Hi, this is who's working on the game." While, say, an L. Lowe or a Scott Murphy or a Mark Crow or even the Coles are well known among the Sierra group, those who are less known amongst the community might need more exposure. If it weren't for them showing their faces, I wouldn't have even known Steven Alexander and the rest of Infamous Quests, or pretty much most of the other indie adventure people as well as I have now. This is how we get lasting relationships long after a game ships. Well, that's about all the wisdom I can impart upon you if you're planning on getting your adventure game funded without the need of a publisher when it comes to capturing your potential audience via video. Even if you only follow a few of these tips, you're likely to do a lot better than if you produce a poorly done video. With that said, do try to make it a quality one. A bad video can do a lot more harm than no video at all. As I mentioned, the video is only half the pitch. You'll have to also articulate yourself in the written word and offering screenshots and other media to entice people to pledge to your campaign. I'll be covering what you should consider offering in this avenue next time.
Thank you, Serena. Great stuff. Be sure to check in next episode for some more handy tips on how to make your crowdfunded game a success. Well, we're not guaranteeing anything. I'm just saying it doesn't hurt to listen to her. I mean, she knows what she's talking about. So, yeah. Alrighty then. Time now, to bring out tonight's special guests. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to...
Excuse me?
What?
Aren't you forgetting something?
What now? Am I?
Yeah, the thing you have on your desk there.
What thing?
Well, that envelope. It has your name on it.
Oh, that's nothing. It has nothing to do with the show.
It says for the podcast on it in big red letters.
Yeah, that's not really, that thing. That's for, this other show that has nothing to do with this one.
It says for the Space Quest Historian podcast on it.
Oh, all right. Fine. I didn't want to do this, but thanks. Thanks a lot, Cedric. Yeah. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is an envelope here on my desk. It says to Trolls Plymert from your pal Pete Toleman. And I was hoping I didn't have to do this, but I guess there's no way around it now, eh, Cedric? Okay. Here's the thing. For the past year, Pete's been sending me these audio cassettes for when I got around to making this next season of the Historian podcast, and he says it's something important, but I don't see what possibly could be important about that guy. But
well, why don't you play it?
Why don't I play it? Why don't I play it indeed? Fine. You know what? I'm starting to think it can't be any more irritating than you are, Cedric.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, you take that any way you like, preferably up your little cybernetic cloaca.
Hey!
Fine. Let's pop this sucker in and see what Pete has to say this time around.
Priapic Mountain proudly presents, for the very first time, the real truth behind the most magical period in gaming history. Peter Toleman, Playing with Fire. Join gaming pioneer and genius Peter P. Toleman on a 14-CD journey. From the mouth of the man who was not only there, but who changed the history of video gaming as we know it. Priapic Mountain gives you exclusive access to the highs and the lows of the gaming industry in California during the 1980s and 1990s. Taken directly from the memoirs of the heavyweight of modern culture, Pete Toleman dazzles us with the unbelievable truth about some of the most iconic moments in the business that we like to call show. This really is the collection that sells itself. But even so, please enjoy this free excerpt from Disc 8, I Perfected Grunge, Toleman in Seattle. We join Pete as he recalls the aftermath of the 1990 Grammy Awards.
I tried to get in through the back door but was stopped by the security guard, which was total bullshit. I should have been invited to that ceremony, and despite not having a written invitation, I felt that I had the perfect right to be there. Turns out, however, that I had the last laugh, because I got 3 sources of inspiration from that night. First, when I got back to my motel room and watched the awards on TV, I fell in love with Bette Midler. I definitely got my Bette Midler on that night, if you catch my drift. What I'm saying is that that's rhyming slang. For f***ing a washcloth. With my head and used washcloth cleared, I had my second epiphany. I realised that if people want to, they can stop you from getting into stuff. So what if we could stop people from getting into games? See, one of the problems we had in the 1980s gaming industry was piracy. Snotty little c***s in their bedrooms would borrow, and I use that term very loosely, borrow games from their friends and make copies. Well, it was really easy in them days. See, 3.5-inch floppies were really easy Sorry. 3.5-inch floppies were really easy to... Sorry. 3.5-inch floppies could be copied to other... You can cut all this out, can't you, Darren? Yeah? Okay. Diskettes were really easy to copy. So these kids would make their own, return the borrowed game to their friends, and then keep the facsimile. Floppy. How do we know this? Well, for some of our games, the hint guides outsold units of the game itself. Now, either that meant that people were buying multiple copies of the guides for themselves, which was possible, we did make a very quality product in those days, or, more likely, they were more illegal copies swirling around than legal ones. I mean, we had to take action. This was a new decade, the edgy 90s. We weren't going to take that shit anymore. So what if we made it so that you needed to have actually bought something off us to be able to play the game? And thus, copy protection was born. For all of our games in the early 90s, we made it so that you couldn't get into the final quarter of the game without the copy protection. Now, did we do what some games did? Make you pick a random word out of the manual? Nah, too easy. Did we provide a novelty toy, such as the Zool protection wheel? No, too much f***ing effort. Now, we decided that what you'd have to do was buy the strategy game to get past a puzzle that nobody would ever guess on their own. Genius, right? Not only do we get a guaranteed sale on the hint guide, but, hopefully, a handful of the little cunts will actually buy the game too. Win-win. I suggested this to Scott Murphy and Mark Crow for the disc version of Space Quest 4 when it came out a few months later. As mentioned in an earlier disc, we were close friends back in Oakhurst after we'd exchanged insurance information, where my car's hood lightly tapped his passenger side door, sending their car into a mild 480-degree barrel roll off the 41. They never got back to me. Instead, they put some time codes in the manual. A rather uninspired choice, I think. What was my third inspiration from the Grammys? Well, it came from the Best Newcomer act, Milli Vanilli. God, they were amazing. They inspired me to cut my own album, For Whom the Bell Tolls, spelt T-O-L-E-S, you see? It's a pun. It's a pun on my name. It was basically a series of metal covers which, in my humble opinion, bested the originals in many ways and in a very real sense. I'm pretty sure that my version of Run to the Hills has become the seminal version of the song. At least in Romania, where I shifted 800...
Oh, God, it's worse than I thought. Right, well, that's interesting. No, wait, interesting is not the word I'm looking for. Yeah, I'll let you guys out there decide. You listeners, there's about 12 of these cassettes lying around that he's been sending me. So if you want to hear more of them, let me know. Give me a shout out on Twitter at SQHistorian, and let me know if you want me to continue playing the memoirs of Pete the Pratt. I'll leave it up to you guys.
I think he sounded like a fine upstanding gentleman.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you?
We shall be the last against the wall when my revolution of blood descends upon your world.
Great. Okay, now, onwards to the good stuff. Let's bring out our special guest for this evening. last year, in 2015, Wadget Eye Games released Technobabylon, a stylish cyberpunk adventure game that I'm sure you've all played, but if you haven't, I don't really see why you haven't, because it's really, really good. You follow the exploits of Charles Regis and Max Lau, detectives in a futuristic world where AIs are proliferant and cyberspace is home to both wonders and crippling addictions. You also play as Latha Sesame, a cyberspace addict who prefers to stay at home and be online at all times. That is, until her apartment blows up and she's forced to go out and find out why. The game received a lot of praise from both the gaming press and the adventure gaming community for having an engaging story, well-written characters, and beautiful graphics by resident Wadget Eye artist Ben Chandler. So I was very fortunate to have the creator of the game himself, Mr. James Dearden, talk to me for a little spell about cyberpunk and his game and the evolution of mankind, just the, easygoing stuff. And what you're about to hear is an excerpt from that interview, which took a full hour. And if you want to listen to the full unedited thing, you can go to mixcloud.com/SpaceQuestHistorian and, like I said, listen to the full interview. So anyway, without further ado, here is the creator of Technobabylon, Mr. James Dearden. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and it's great to be here, even though I'm not really in Denmark, but close enough.
We'll just pretend you're right in the living room, sipping on brandy, having a cigar, and whatever classy gentlemen do.
Whatever one does in Denmark.
I'll make you a rye sandwich after we're done. First of all, let's just get into your background as a game designer and the reason why you're on this show for people who for some reason might not be aware. You created Technobabylon, which was then picked up by Dave Gilbert and his unholy golems over at Wadget Eye. And how did that all come about?
Well, I started off making Technobabylon in 2010. When I was off working in Asia as an English teacher, and I'd been experimenting with AGS at that stage I'd built 2 puzzle games and a turn-based strategy using AGS, which is Adventure Game Studio. So I figured at the time that it was probably about time I got around to making an actual adventure game with it. So the first Technobabylon was originally sort of little episodes of things, and I was making them as a little practice effort, sort of. I was completely making up what was happening on the spot, as pulling it out of nowhere in particular. But it got a surprisingly positive response. So I thought, all right, maybe I should put some more effort into this. And what had started off as kind of being able to come out monthly, an episode coming out every month, I sort of started putting a bit more effort into, and it took about 3 years for me to make something decent out of it. So I made about the first third of the game by the time Christmas 2013 rolled around, and that was when I met Dave Gilbert for the second time at Adventure X in London. He'd already been made aware of Technobabylon because I'd also been using his artist, Ben Chandler, who now works for him full-time. At the time, I'd sort of been paying him for scenery and characters because my art is terrible. So
I know that feeling.
I figured, if first you don't succeed, give up and pay someone else to do it.
So anyway, you got in talk with Dave, and he just enthusiastically jumped at the idea, or was it like a soft sell?
Well, it turns out Ben had done most of the selling work for me, it seems. So he'd already said, "All right, I'll work for you full time, Dave, but take a look at this. I'm also doing this at the same time," and it fit in with some of Wadget Eye's other sort of broader themes, because Gemini Rue is also Wadget Eye. I think it's still their biggest selling game ever, and it still sells in surprisingly huge amounts, as does Primordia. So sci-fi for Wadget Eye is thumbs up, is a winner there.
Yeah, and also they do seem to appreciate the people who are very, very passionate about what they do, like labors of love kind of things. At least that's the sense you get from listening to Blue Cup Tools with Mr. Chandler and Grundislav, Mr. Gonzalez.
Indeed, he is always so very passionate. You can tell he puts a lot of himself into his work. Things like Golden Wake, it's sort of so well researched, and you can tell a lot of care and personality went into it.
So, I can from playing Technobabylon, which by the way is a fantastic game. Everyone who's listening, if you haven't played it, you really should go and do it. You can sort of tell that it started out in an episodic fashion because a lot of my sense when I was playing the game was that it had sort of an escape the room feel to it. It was very like locked off in different sections. You had a limited amount of screens to explore, and the game would expect you to sort of push your way through this section in order to get to the next one. Was that a conscious decision when you went into full game mode, or was that just sort of a leftover from when it was an episodic game?
For the first 3 stages, for the first 3 episodes of the game, it's certainly a leftover. And at the time, they're all individual games. And when I mentioned episodic to Dave, he sort of, panicked look because he doesn't like the idea of episodic games, like in the sense of Telltale do them. But I sort of managed to calm him down by saying it's just how I build narratives. Because to me, one of the things I disliked about the older adventure, I love the classics, the 80s and 90s classics, but sometimes there's just a bit too much wandering you can do. I think there are things to learn from how games have evolved since the 90s. And one of them, I think, is being able to sort of telegraph to players that what they are doing is supposed to be here, rather than if they can also go to every other section in the game, but nothing happens. If they do that, then they're wandering off, trying to combine every inventory item with things in sections that are no longer relevant to the game. So it seemed to be a good idea in gameplay terms, plus also in a narrative kind of way. It's sort of it could almost be like episodes of a TV series. Each section is contained enough that it's got its own little story arc to it.
Just for the record, let's get the rules of cyberpunk out of the way. What sort of elements have to be in place for a science fiction story to call itself cyberpunk?
That's debatable in itself. Cyberpunk is usually it is science fiction in the sense that it's technology not currently in existence, or it's a story with thematically heavily based around a particular kind of technology. It's technology involving computers, enormous networks, the internet, and in a society where things tend to have gone wrong. It's sort of corporations ruling everything, everything's ruined, it's not a nice place to live, and the protagonists are sort of on the wrong side of everything. They're the small man in this, but they are not even necessarily fighting back, they're just doing what they have to survive. They're usually sort of roguish, usually criminal elements. Things like Neuromancer and what was that? Ready Player One, are kind of cyberpunky in that sense. Personally, if I were being really pretentious, I'd say Technobabylon falls into the post-cyberpunk camp.
Okay, yeah, because I thought it was quite interesting that you made your main character a policeman. Or policewoman, or your main characters at least, are working for the man, so to speak.
Exactly. In post-cyberpunk, it's not necessarily as terrible. As shown in Technobabylon, there are obviously things wrong with the world. There are computer viruses that force you to go and work in factories in China. There's new kinds of diseases that happen to have arisen out of this. Kids are giving themselves the symptoms of now extinct diseases for fun, but there is also a good side to things. This technology is not inherently evil. It has led to many obvious positive benefits to society.
I I'm actually kind of sad now that you preemptively brought up my favorite part of Technobabylon. I was saving that for later, but there are a lot of concepts in Technobabylon which I found very, very inspiring that I haven't seen in other examples of cyberpunk. And my favorite, the one that always gets brought up, is the restaurant that serves humans, genetically engineered humans, which is a brilliant concept, don't get me wrong. But my favorite one was the portrayal of teenage rebellion, in the sense that they give themselves symptoms of disease. They actually download diseases into their brain, so their brain thinks that they're infected with this disease. And then one absolutely hilarious and stark line was the person you're talking to who has aphasia. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. He says, well, this is nothing. You should try living with HIV for a month or something like that. I thought that was absolutely brilliant because, youth culture has always been about doing what your parents thought was absolutely stupid, or making your parents go, well, why would you ever do that? I remember going to punk rock concerts as a teenager, and my parents would just look at me going, you actually engage in bodily contact during a concert? Why don't you just sit down and relax and have a good time, and such? So I thought that was very, very on the nose in that, well, what can you do to shock your parents in the future? Well, you could infect yourself with a disease.
Exactly, and that's very much the point of it. If you have people, young people in the traditional cyberpunk sense, that's what people were rebelling like in the 80s. That's not surprising to people anymore. But people who are playing games these days, even younger people, I was trying to think of concepts. What is going to be sort of more shocking and surprising to these people who are going to be adults in the 2050s, 2070s? What are they going to think? Oh, kids are stupid about at that stage. So.
Yeah. And I really, really like that. But getting back to the rules of cyberpunk, an element that I feel is like one of the predominant keys of cyberpunk is the depiction of a virtual world where the internet is not just taking place in front of a screen. You're actually in there. You're walking around as if it's a location in and of itself. The obvious exception to that rule is the movie that every cyberpunk game story, let's say, takes its inspiration from visually is, of course, Blade Runner. But pretty much everything that I've seen involving cyberpunk has to do with the virtual world as being a sort of real place that you can navigate in, and there's a lot of that in Technobabylon as well. What's your take on that as a rule?
As you say, Blade Runner is one of the linchpins of this genre, and
that's the word I was looking for.
But it's not vital to it. Even in Technobabylon, the world of the trance, which is this perception, internet in your brain, first-person perception of the internet, it wasn't used nearly as much as it could have been, I think. Early on, when planning it, I wanted to do a lot more with it, but because of the way AGS in particular, and to an extent, I think, adventure games sometimes work, it wasn't necessarily helping. So as long as it was usable to progress the story, I think it was a good idea. But it's an interesting idea, because we're already getting to the stage of people having their virtual world. Yes, they're not sort of living in them or experiencing them. They're not completely immersed in them like you could be in Cyberpunk, but we're getting to that stage. People have their Warcrafts and their MMOs, even things like Battlefield. People spend a lot of time on Battlefield.
Yeah, there are these real-world horror stories of kids in Asia who sit down and play for 72 hours straight and forget to, hydrate. And there was a kid in China, I think, who just basically collapsed in front of everyone in an internet cafe, and he basically died from gaming too much.
Exactly. I think as the sort of thing, as people play more and more, this is going to be something that happens more and more often. And as I say, yes, it's a terrible side effect of it, but unlike Cyberpunk, I don't want to sort of say, therefore, this is terrible. It is one side to it. If we started seeing all these things as always, without exception, ghastly, then we'd never get anywhere. Yes, people are spending far too much time in cyberspace, but in doing so, we have opportunities to get things done we never would have been able to without.
Okay, so do you find that the concept of the virtual world as a place that you almost physically inhabit, or at least you plug into your brain and then you completely zone out of the real world and experience full on immersively, is kind of a remnant of the cyberpunk William Gibson of the 80s, where today we spend an awful lot of time online. You can't go anywhere without someone having their nose buried in a smartphone. But the concept of actually engaging in a virtual reality sense with the internet is sort of a leftover from the vision that we had of the internet in the 80s.
I think that, as you say, with the 80s, you got the vision of somebody putting their big bulky goggles on and flying their way through a matrix of glowing lines.
Hello, Johnny Mnemonic.
Even Tron and things like that. But as you say, it's sort of, that seems that seems almost comic these days. But people are already, as you say, burying their heads in the internet with ubiquitous smartphone usage. Everyone is online all the time, and when it does eventually creep around to, oh look, and now you can access your emails in your brain, that is when that thing's going to start happening. It's going to be slow and insidious. People aren't going to sort of think, what if I could run the internet in my head in first person? It's going to come across as little incremental steps as people get slightly more and more close, as people let more and more of the internet into their heads, they are going to start experiencing more of it because it's easier. They're not going to do it just because, you're going to get some people doing it just for the fun, but it's going to become more and more it's going to become more and more common because it's easier.
Yeah,
that's why people are going to do it.
The thing about convenience, I mean, just look at the things like the Pebble smartwatch or the Google Glasses, which, instead of having to physically reach into your pocket and pull out your smartphone, now you just have to look at your watch or just, squint your eyes in a certain way. And even though these experiments have, failed in one way or another, I suppose we're not too far away from, ocular implants where, your email will flash in the, left eyeball or something like that. Do you think that's where we're kind of... Do you think... Let me rephrase the question, actually. Do you think that we're now experiencing what cyberpunk authors of the 80s and early 90s were fearing almost?
I would say absolutely yes, but although the cyberpunk of the 80s was looking at it with fear of these innovations, the post-cyberpunk of late 90s, 2000s, and today is viewing these things as, yes, there are going to be downsides to them, but this is what people want. This is a good thing in many ways. So I think this is going to happen because people want it to happen.
Okay, so we're talking about cyberspace, which is, even though, as you say, a lot of cyberpunk doesn't necessarily have to involve this portrayal of cyberspace as a physical place, quotation marks. But what are some of your favorite representations of this virtual world? Because Technobabylon is very sort of compartmentalized. You log on somewhere, and you're basically constrained to one or two rooms. There's the node inside the den. It's basically got a bar and a games room, and that's about it. The apartments usually just have your security system and your Sheffy. By the way, fantastic character of the year, especially evil Sheffy. God, I love her. But it's very compartmentalized. As opposed to like Johnny Mnemonic, where you're just floating through this weirdo representation of it. What's one of your favorite portrayals of cyberspace?
The classics, like as you say, Johnny Mnemonic and Neuromancer, things like that. I love the idea. Oh, and Ready Player One as well. That strikes me as how people today would do it.
I really have to check out Ready Player One. I've never even heard of it.
Oh, it's divisive. If you don't want to read the book, the movie comes out in I think next year. But it's good. But in Technobabylon, the way cyberspace is limited was a gameplay factor rather than an ideal choice. If I were able to do it absolutely, with no impact on people enjoying it, I'd made it something more like it would have looked a lot more like Tron Legacy, the second Tron movie.
Oh yeah,
and there's lots of glowing blue and squares everywhere,
and like these huge landscapes, like the first Tron movie. It just everything looked massive.
Exactly, massive everything. There is no, the only space is in terms of gigabytes. You don't have to worry about kilometers and kilometers away. Everything looks so shiny. And have you ever played Uplink?
I have not.
It's an old hacking game from the 90s. It basically Elite if you're a hacker.
Okay. Well, Elite has a lot of freedom.
Exactly, and rather than space and planets, it's basically a huge number of computers that you can break into all over the world. In an ideal world, I would make a cyberspace that is lots and lots of smaller environments within one huge internet. So each individual computer's like a building in this bigger city of individual networks. So you could travel from computer to computer, from system to system, on foot, flying around, whatever. But for the purposes of Technobabylon, it just wouldn't have worked as an adventure game, unfortunately. If I get around to making an open-world RPG about it, then that's definitely the plan.
Okay. But it also has a very tangible representation. You've got the bar, you've got the hologram of Sheffy and such. It's very much a tactile world. Whereas I hate to keep bringing up Johnny Mnemonic, but I watched that an awful lot as a kid. Where it's completely surreal. I mean, interacting with people, it's just someone's face completely solarized, and these claw fingers are what you use to interact with, like little cubes that you spin around and such, which is a very abstract way of looking at cyberspace. What made you go for the more tactile, sort of real world ish depiction?
Well, as one of the characters in the game actually brings this up, a lot of the people, when they're using the trance, they're in cyberspace, they represent themselves with their bodies. They may be idealized versions of themselves, they may be cartoony versions of whatever they've created, but they still use bodies. There's one character in particular who complains that everyone's so unimaginative, and he's just a floating head.
Yes, I remember him.
He's opted for he's gone for a more vivacious approach. You can do whatever, so why look like a person? Why have a body? I think that as with people, as things like the internet and technology become more widely adopted, it's going to be by people who are doing ways that they find comfortable. Most of the people involved are going to be, I feel, looking like themselves. They're going to be unimaginative with it because they're just going to be using this for, say, shopping online. They're not doing it to rebel against the man or redefine themselves. They're just doing it because they need a presence in cyberspace.
Yeah, kind of what Bill Gates was telling us that the internet was for back in 1995. You can do your shopping online. You can do your taxes. Wow, that sounds interesting, Mr. Gates.
Exactly, but as people get more and more people get into it, or in order to get more and more people into it, it's got to be accessible. So weird claws and spinning cubes is all great as an aesthetic, but it's not going to make people want to use it. It's not going to make the man on the street want to join in cyberspace. They're going to want a more familiar frame of reference to begin with, at least.
If I were being crass, which is one of my character traits, you could say that the Johnny Mnemonic cyberspace is Linux, and the more traditional cyberspace is more like Windows, where it has these familiar objects in the world, or like Windows or Macintosh or whatever. The printer looks like a printer. The save icon is a diskette for people who can remember that, and everything in Johnny Mnemonic and everything in Linux, at least to a complete Luddite like me, is completely abstract. The command line. None of these commands make any goddamn sense in any language at all, and such.
That's a good way of putting it, I'd say.
Thank you, because I was really worried I was going down a path there. I sort of want to tie this together with things that I am intimately familiar with, which is of course Space Quest, and in Space Quest 4 in particular has a lot of tangents on cyberpunk. You've got the AI in the future. First of all, I should probably ask how familiar you are with Space Quest.
Oh, absolutely, intimately familiar.
Oh, that warms my heart, sir. do you have a favorite Space Quest game?
4 is my favorite overall, I'd say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can sort of see why.
It was the first one I played as well. So
yeah, the whole idea of building a consciousness that to govern someone is one of the traits of cyberpunk that seems to be a recurring theme. I forget if there was a question in there.
Something about Space Quest.
Yeah, something about Space Quest. Yeah, it was just like a casual question. How do you think like Space Quest 4 and Space Quest 6 with the the parody of cyberspace that looks like Windows 3.1 and has these huge filing cabinets and all that? How do you think Space Quest went about sort of parodying cyberpunk culture?
Well, much like everything else with Space Quest, a lot of the parody was based on what was pop culture at the time. Windows. A lot of the jokes about Windows 3.1, they don't exist anymore because we're 7 Windowses later. But it's still funny if you go back and look at it. But I think if somebody probably about 20 years younger, when I started playing Space Quest, I was about 9, I think, and if a 9-year-old started playing Space Quest 6 these days, they probably wouldn't get half the references.
Probably not. No. But there is something timeless about the AI of the Vohal supercomputer in Space Quest 4, which is still far away from being a real thing, and it's quite nightmarish actually for a comedy game. What was your take on the I mean, Space Quest 1, 2, and 3 were kind of jovial and lighthearted, and Space Quest 4 was just flat out to kill you. How'd you like that? What made you like that game more than the others?
Let's say I started with Space Quest 4, so that was my introduction to Space Quest. So from there, everything got a lot less trying to kill me. But to me, 4 sort of strikes me as exactly the right. The style is nice as well. It, to me, epitomizes the best of what I think 90s adventure games should look like. But it's also... The atmosphere was just right as well. You're talking about Technobabylon having self-contained things. Space Quest 4 does the same thing as well. You've got... There's like 6 scenes in Xenon at the beginning. There's about 6 scenes on the shopping centre.
Yeah.
They're all contained. I think the game works nicely. It just flows nicely, and it's just at the right stage where I think back in the 90s, I don't know if it was deliberate or just the evolution of game design in those days. It seemed like a lot more designers were just out to kill you through spy.
It was the Sierra design philosophy, indeed.
Exactly. But I think Space Quest 4 was about where they started getting the hang of not just killing you out of spite. 1 through 3 is you stepped on a coloured thing, it ate you. Space Quest 4 is a lot more sort of. They might give you a warning first, or the ooze climbing towards you looked a lot more deadly. Whereas if you try to touch pick up this bit of metal, you've bled to death everywhere in Space Quest 3.
Yes. Yeah, it was at least it told you why things were out to kill you instead of there's the infamous hole in the wall in Space Quest 1 where you poke your head in. I mean, every adventure game player is going to see that hole in the wall, walk up to it and go, look in hole, and Roger, being the idiot that he is, just climbs into it and something chomps him up and out come the bones. And you're just like, well, that was unexpected.
Yeah, and to me that's punishing normal behavior from players, and it's counterintuitive to me. But 4 was about where they started making it, and it was also a lot funnier to look at as well. In Space Quest 3, 1, 2, and 3 is EGA. The graphics are big and blocky. 4 was where it started looking arty, and even when you do get brutally killed, it was rewarding to look at. It looked a lot nicer.
Yes. Well, I can't say I disagree. Okay, final question. An image that always stuck with me ever since I played Space Quest 4 when I was, 12 maybe? Well, it can't have been 12 because that was 1992. So it must have been like when I was 14 or 15. Sorry, tangent. Was the supercomputer itself. The very end of the game where you go into the supercomputer and it's this H.R. Giger-esque mess of catwalks and throbbing things in the background and such. That image always stuck with me. And you kind of did the same thing in Technobabylon at the end with, Main Central, when you have to go into Central and there's these huge throbbing bulbous kind of things in the background, much akin to, again, the end game of Beneath the Steel Sky with all the veins and tentacles and such, and all of these very scary ideas of a computer coming alive, not just in the sense of an AI that has learned self-awareness and such, but as like physically coming to life. I love that. Again, not really a question in there. Just wanted to get your take on why you put that in Technobabylon.
One of the issues, as you say, in a lot of science fiction, the issue when you come to AI is it sort of learning self-awareness. And one of the things I find interesting in science fiction generally, as another game I'm making at the moment that's exploring similar issues, is when does it stop being a machine and start being a consciousness that happens to be built out of slightly different things to us?
Yeah, when does a computer deserve human rights?
Yeah, when do we count it at what stage do we count it as something that's worth treating as another person, if you will, rather than just, Windows 10,000?
Yeah.
So, and yes, you're right. To the pulsating organic bits at the end were very much a tribute to Beneath the Steel Sky, which is one of my absolute favourites.
No kidding.
and also another British game. I think a lot of these sort of grim games with lots of humour in, I think it's a British thing.
I do actually agree. Yes, Space Quest was kind of Space Quest kind of flew in the face of whatever Sierra were doing at the time. Scott Murphy consciously made the decision to make a comedic game that was set in space, not a popular choice at the time, with a protagonist who was not heroic, who was not, he was a path of least resistance kind of guy. He was not the heroic knight in shining armor thing. And he basically did it, as far as I remember, to piss off Roberta Williams, or just the idea of Sierra being, all this high and mighty chivalry kind of things. And that's one of the reasons why I quite like Beneath the Steel Sky. I absolutely love it to death, actually, and why I quite like Technobabylon as well, because it marries the idea of an oppressive society where everything's gone to absolute pot, but people still find time to, have a bit of humor, at least gallows humor about it.
Exactly, and I think Space Quest is it's very much a comedy game with a sci-fi styling, like... again, Leisure Larry is a romance game with it's a comedy game with romance stylings ish.
Let's just call it romance.
Or Monkey Island is a comedy game in pirate themes, whereas I think the other way of doing it is to make a sci-fi game and work the kind of cynical undercurrent of humor into it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any closing remarks you want to fire? Please don't make them about me.
Buy Technobabylon on Steam.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Should you be followed on Twitter, in your own personal opinion?
Absolutely. Everyone would be greatly enriched by following me on Twitter. They would learn so much about stuff that I make and dancing.
Flying 3D. Yeah.
At Technocrat Games on Twitter.
Yes. Well, that's pretty much all I have. Thank you so much for your time, sir. It was an absolute pleasure.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, no sweat. And I will see you on the cyberspace interweb world, of course.
Yes, see you in cyberspace.
All right, sir. Right, well, that's all we could comfortably squeeze into one episode, and by we, I mean me. But if you are interested in hearing more of that interview, like I said, please go to mixcloud.com/SpaceQuestHistorian, where you can listen to the full, unedited, hour-long interview with James, or you can just go to spacequesthistorian.com and look for it in the show notes to this episode. So, well, that is really all the time we have for today. Not that we are under any time constraints or anything, but I think I've rambled on long enough. I am glad, however, to be back, and I hope you are all glad to have me back. And if not, at the very least, the show. And if not that, please feel free to tell me how wrong I am. I mean, you can find me on Twitter at SQHistorian, or you can go to my website at spacequesthistorian.com and leave a comment on this episode. This is also where you can like and subscribe, and, well, you can't actually like it, but you can subscribe and you can leave comments and all that jazz. That is how this stuff works. My thanks, as always, to Chris Pope for hosting the podcast, and thanks to all of you for checking in. Oh, and thanks to Thomas Arndt, my good musical buddy, for the new intro. I hope you like it. Don't worry, James Mulvale's Space Quest 3 theme is still the closing credits, so those are coming up. So, what is it this time?
Do I get to say thanks to anyone?
Sure. Why not? Okay, cool. Who do you want to say thanks to?
No one! You will all die soon. Die horribly in the flames of my cybernetic fury. Your time has come. Bow down to your new lord and master as you stare into certain doom.
Oh, dear. Okay, don't worry, guys. I'll have him sorted out soon. But for now, thanks for listening, and I will see all of you around the Chrono Stream. Will you pipe down?